including a list of 66 weather modification programs going on. This week we listened to a presentation by Pauline Cantwell titled "The Wild Cards in Climate Change." Cantwell focused on climate change issues not being discussed in the mainstream media, including the history of manipulation of weather and climate, the economic and social impacts of weather modification, weather as a weapon, and the dangers of climate mitigation. It was a heavy spray day.
Particularly the cloud cover and dumping iron filings in the ocean. So, the first quote I want to use is from Secretary of Defense William Cohen, 1997, at a conference in Athens, Georgia, on terrorism. Others are engaging even in eco-terrorism, whereby they can alter the climate, set off volcanoes, earthquakes, remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. It's real, and therefore we must intensify our efforts. Environmental warfare is defined as the intentional modification or manipulation of the natural ecology, such as climate and weather, earth systems, such as the ionosphere, magnetosphere, tectonic plate system, which of course creates earthquakes, and or the triggering of seismic events, such as earthquakes, to cause intentional physical destruction to an intended target, geophysical, or population location as part of strategic or tactical war. There is a long history of the military's intention to undertake environmental engineering, especially to gain control of the weather. One of the first was Project SEAL, a top secret experiments conducted off New Zealand coast, a tidal wave bomb, nicknamed a tsunami bomb, 1944 and 1945, the same time the nuclear weapons were being developed. Project Cirrus, C-I-R-R-U-S, the first note to control a hurricane, ill-fated joint project by the U.S. Navy and a group of scientists from General Electric, October 13th, 1947, resulted in a hurricane making landfall near Savannah, Georgia. They quickly kind of locked up the records on that one. Artificial Cloud Nucleation Project, AEN, from 1951 through 1953. The U.S. Navy and Air Force conducted numerous and systemic cloud seeding experiments in southwestern Washington. Project Skyfire. In 1960 and 61, the U.S. Army pursued lightning suppression through experiments where millions of tiny needles were released to seed clouds. They explored the potential of using shaft to pull the teeth of a thunderstorm, launched rockets to trigger lightning discharges. The Soviet programs to create clear skies for May Day parades. This is a Soviet system. The electron cyclotron resonance heating method, now being used to alter the Earth's magnetic field in order to modify weather, create or trigger earthquakes and volcanoes, spread viruses, create the phenomenon known as electromagnetic pulse, and to modify behavior control among the populations. These weapons have a great mind control aspect. They can project sounds in people's heads, which are now being commercialized. There's an advertising company using it in New York right now. Project Woodpecker. So they have many, many aspects, but for today we will concentrate on the weather aspects. This Russian system was turned on July 4th, 1976, our bicentennial. The Russians had made advances in inventing the all-important jet stream that sweeps across Siberia to set global wind patterns. This system is named for the hammering sound that it makes on shortwave radio. So every shortwave radio operator in the world knows what woodpecker is when you talk about it. So when the Russians turn on their system, you can hear it. It's in the 3 to 30 megahertz range that it's heard. By using explosive devices in the jet stream, scientists are trying to make it dip and rise in a wave that could replace the frigid Siberian winters with milder air from the south. Now notice this started in 1976. The Russians started working with Nikola Tesla, who lived in New York City. He was Serbian. He set off many earthquakes small earthquakes in New York City, He built a tower on Long Island. He said he could get energy free from the earth and transmit it without power lines. And he did work with the Russians. The English and Americans refused to work with him. He developed a weapon that he said he could knock down planes 200 miles out from a coastline, basically the curvature of the earth. And he thought it was a weapon to end all war. So to go along with the woodpecker system, you have the woodpecker grid, which is basically just a grid that can be placed over the earth. And then they can channel these longitudinal wave, EM waves. They provide a channel for the LW waves to any point on Earth. And then computers use the information to hone down the aiming of these waves. Then Project Storm Fury was hurricane modification in the U.S. 1962 through 83. Artificial stimulation of convection outside the eye wall through seeding with silver iodide. Modification attempted on 4 hurricanes on 8 different days with inconclusive results. Project Whitetop. Cloud seeding experiment performed over West Plains, Missouri, over 5 summers. Project Faultless. The United States set off a nuclear weapon on a fault line deep in the vast Nevada desert in 1968 to see if they could induce an earthquake. And indeed, they did get one. That was our weather operation to muddy up the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Vietnam. It is cited as a reason for INMOD legislation being negotiated at the United Nations, which I will talk about later. Project Cloverleaf. This was CIA-led, one of the initial aerosolized heavy metal particulate operations, mid-1990s. The U.S. DoD operations soon followed as the U.S. Air Force became embedded in the overall expansion of significant global warming mitigation strategies in the form of weather modification and geoengineering practices. And this can be detailed in Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. A massive Air Force document, 3,000 pages, all of which are on my website. GWIN, this is Ground Wave Emergency Network Towers, constructed in the 1980s across the United States. They're nearly 300 feet tall. They transmit bursts of low-frequency waves, and they can also emit UHF waves. Purpose is not clear on those, but many storms have been attributed to those. They had a lot of them in Wisconsin. So HARP, the one we were talking about, and I did have the picture of it that I was passing, here she has it here, passing around, but that's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It is by Gakona, Alaska. It's described as a premier ionic research facility, and it's operated jointly by the U.S. Air Force and Navy. The antennas bombard and heat the ionosphere, causing electromagnetic frequencies to bounce back to Earth, penetrating everything living and dead. They make holes in the ozone, too. It was used recently. They shot up a beam to the moon, and it came back to Earth a few weeks ago. Alaskan scientist Dr. Nick Begich describes HARP as, quote, a super powerful radio wave beam technology that lifts areas of the ionosphere, upper layer of the atmosphere, by focusing a beam and heating those areas. In August 2002, the Russian State Duma expressed concern about HARP, calling it a program to develop, quote, a qualitatively new type of weapon. In February of 1998, the European Parliament's Committee on Foreign Affairs, Security and Defense Policy held public hearings in Brussels on HARP. The committee's motion for resolution submitted to the European Parliament, quote, considers HARP, by virtue of its far-reaching impact on the environment, to be a global concern and calls for its legal, ecological, and ethical implications to be examined by an international independent body. HIPAS, HIPAS, is operated by the United States, and that is at Poker Flats, Alaska. Altitude, ultra-low frequency weapons, plasma, electromagnetic, sonic, and ultrasonic weapons, laser weapons, strategic, theater, tactical, or extraterrestrial weapons, chemical, biological, environmental, climate, or tectonic weapons, and chemtrails. The Washington Times reported March 29, 1992 on incidents of extremely low frequencies being associated with earthquakes, stating satellites and ground sensors detected mysterious radio waves or related electrical magnetic activity before major earthquakes in Southern California in 1989.